All right, now we're going to talk about the hardest edge of hard edge modeling, which is ZModeler, and that's basically box modeling in ZBrush. Now, if you'll remember, let's go ahead and grab a primitive here. So when we grab a ZBrush 3D mesh primitive and we drag out a cube here when we look at it, it's going to give us some primitive options. It's going to have squares over here, and it's going to have polarized ends, and we're going to go to initialize here, and you're going to see some initialized settings like H and V size, twist, H divide, stuff like that. This is a ZBrush primitive. So if we go ahead and make this a polymesh 3D, and now it's a sculptable primitive, and we've talked about this before. Go ahead and do a preferences, edit, line cursor, just turn that off. But as soon as we make this a polymesh 3D, it becomes polygons. You are no longer able to initialize this as a primitive. However, it does still have an initialized state. So you're going to see down here we have cube, sphere, and a couple of cylinder options, and then some resolution options. All this is just a way to initialize to give you a nice little shape to start out with ZModeler. And again, that's just box modeling. So if we go ahead and hit cube, and we have a resolution of 2, that means we have a polygon cube subdivided once. So it's kind of like a res of 2. We turn this down to a res of 1 and hit cube. It's just a resolution of 1. And of course, we type in 3 and just hit tab to tab over and hit 3 for all those. Then hit cube. We get 3. Same thing with sphere. Here's a sphere. You can change the resolution. cylinder. The only reason cylinder has X, Y, and Z is because it has different axes that you can shoot those down. So if we do a cylinder, let's drop these back down to resolution of 2. So 2, tab, 2, tab, 2, tab, and hit cylinder in the X, and we turn on our floor, and we look at the X-axis, which is red. It will shoot. This cylinder is pointing down the X-axis. If we do a Y-axis cylinder, it's going to point straight up like the Y, and then Z is, of course, Z forward. So that's the initialized settings for our ZModeler. So now that we know what that does, you know what that does. Now, you don't have to start with let's go ahead and turn our floor off. You don't have to start with a primitive. You can actually go in here, and if there's something you don't like, say these gloves, you can just select the subtool and then go down here to initialize and make them a polycube. So we're going to we just turn them into an initialized polycube. So it's kind of up to you, but I like those gloves, so we're going to undo that. So if you do want to start with a new ZModeler thing, and you just want to start with something fresh, just go ahead and go to append, and append any primitive. It doesn't really matter. It's going to knock it out of its initialized primitive state and automatically make it a polymesh 3D and give you these. We can just go ahead and initialize a cube at a resolution of 2. And of course, it's not going to be centered because we haven't touched it yet. If you hit F, you can frame it, you can tap it. So if you hit F once, it'll frame the selected subtool. If you hit F again, it'll frame all your subtools. Even if you have solo on, it'll frame them all. So that's just a different way to cycle between framing. Just toggling with F. So let's go ahead and turn on our floor. And I'm going to turn everything else off except for this cube so we don't get confused. We're going to talk about ZModeling and how they can tie in and how you can make use of this as you start modeling your hard-as objects. So the basics of ZModeler, it's fairly intuitive, fairly simple. If you're a super box modeler from another package, Maya, Max, XSI, Modo, whatever, you'll catch on to this really quickly. You might be a little bit turned off at first due to the lack of, I mean, there won't be any hotkeys, and there is. You can make hotkeys if you'd like. You can actually go in here and make a hotkey of any one of these combinations, no problem. Just set up this, if you want to say, I always want to extrude a single poly, then you can go ahead and with the ZModeler, you can go ahead and save a brush with these settings and then go ahead and assign a hotkey to that brush, kind of like how I have when I hit, when you save it into your, let's go ahead and do it. Brush, save as, save it into your ZStartup brush presets, save it in here. It'll be loaded every single time you load up ZBrush. Assign a hotkey to it when it shows up. Store your config, preferences, initialize, or preferences config, store config, and then your hotkey will be saved to the exact settings of whatever you choose in here. So now that I've said all that, I will say that I've never actually wanted or needed to set a hotkey.